And so we are gonna start off by saying thank you everybody so much for coming to this event, this Death Over Tea. We have a very special guest today. Her name is Marissa Click, and I just want to read her bio because it's quite impressive. And I have to say, Marissa and I connected. And had coffee, and I think our coffee breakfast date turned into like 3 hours. I could not, I could have spent
Mm.
all day with her. She's an incredible human being, and I'm just so incredibly honored and humbled that she chose to spend her evening with us. So Marissa Click is an oncology and palliative care chaplain at St. Alphonsus Regional Medical Center and the bereavement and volunteer coordinator at Bluebird Health here in the Treasure Valley. Marissa believes in helping people make meaning out of the transitions in life they find themselves in. Marissa obtained her master's degree from Emmanuel Christian Seminary in 2015. Marissa is a board certified chaplain with national recognition, achieving the 2018 World Class Award in Hospice Care. She is a powerful force in the workplace, bringing energy, creativity, and life to every interaction and with coworkers and clients. Marissa works hard to build a good life, balancing hard work alongside hard play. In her free time, she enjoys playing board games, curling up with good book, and has recently started playing slow pitch softball, which I am so um, um, and I'm like over here cheering her on because I am a softball um, uh, like really want to get back into that. So without further ado, Marissa, please just kind of introduce yourself, share us, maybe share a little bit more about yourself. I really want to encourage people. This is an organic conversation. I have some questions I would love to ask Marissa, but this is really giving you also an opportunity to see and ask questions about what the day in life for a hospice chaplain would look like. So, Marissa, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and anything that's weighing on your heart or anything you'd like to share with us? So, I will be quiet.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for inviting me into this space and with you all today. I know sometimes people hear the word chaplain and they get a little bit like, ooh, where's this going to go? Um, I think the number one question I get asked when I walk into a hospital room is, am I dying? So, yes, we're all dying, right? That's why we're here today to talk about it. So, yeah, if you don't know much about chaplains, right, we function a little bit like um, a spiritual guide in various settings, not just medical. Uh, and I say spiritual and not religious because those are two different things, right? All of us are spiritual and have a journey to take in this life. We have different coping mechanisms and practices that help center us and help us to achieve a sense of balance and understanding and ways to cope with the world and what we're experiencing. Sometimes those are religious, right? But religion has, a set of rules and regulations and functions in a specific way for those who um, right choose to follow a certain religion. So as chaplains, we kind of straddle these beautiful lines uh, where we can help people, navigate all of these transitions that all of us go through um, throughout our lives. And sometimes that looks more religious if that's what the person leans towards, and sometimes more often it's much more spiritual. So chaplains work in school settings, especially higher education. Uh, Chaplains work in medical settings. There's chaplains in the military. There's chaplains in some businesses are starting to get chaplains, right? Like, oh, what's that famous chicken? Tyson. Tyson has them, right? Tesla has chaplains. And so, um, right? I think the hope for most chaplains is that we can help fill a space for people to feel safe, to explore what they need to be okay with their life circumstances. Um, so, in order to become a chaplain, uh, you basically, right, go through and get a bachelor's degree in whatever setting. So, for example, my bachelor's degree is in art. I have a photography degree, and my minor's in religious studies. And so, for me, what kind of led down that path was I took this class in college called The Bible is Literature, and it kind of examined the Bible from a non religious lens, right? Just looking at it like any other literary book. And it was really wonderful and eye opening to have these um, difficult questions being asked. And I happened to be living with the pastor and his family at the church that I was attending at the time. And I would come to them with these questions that were pretty big, and I was pretty new in my own faith journey. Um, and instead of answering the questions, they just asked better and better questions to get me to think for myself. And I thought that was a really lovely way of being with someone and journeying with them. And I thought, man, if that's what ministry can look like, rather than this kind of top down telling people what to think and what to believe, I want more of that. So I decided to go to Emmanuel, which is a seminary. Seminaries are the school places that clergy go to. Most of them kind of fall under certain religious orders, right? So the one that I went to is part of the Stone Campbell movement, which encompasses Christian churches, Churches of Christ, and Disciples of Christ, which are all Christian denominations. But there's Lutheran seminaries, there's Seventh Day Adventist seminaries, um, right, and other religious traditions, right? It might be going to a temple or you know whatever education is offered within their tradition. Um, and now, as part of the chaplaincy certification process, they're starting to broaden the educational requirements because we're seeing more and more chaplains um, come into this work that aren't grounded in um, a traditional religion like Christianity or Judaism or Buddhism, right? We are seeing a lot more like Unitarian Universalists who are chaplains, right? People who are incredibly spiritual and connected to the spiritual realm, right? But aren't practicing a religion. So, to become a board certified chaplain, you do have to have that higher education piece. So, I have a Master of Divinity with an emphasis in theology, which I know sounds very mystical and powerful, but it was really just a lot of like studying church history and various theologians and their thoughts and reading because I went to a Christian school, right? The Christian Bible, and working through language, right? Like Greek and Hebrew and all of that kind of stuff. Um, So that MDiv, which is the shorthand for Master of Divinity, or whatever education somebody gets, that's kind of the basis for what you need, like the starting point of what you need to become a board certified chaplain, which is in the United States a federally recognized licensing. So after you finish that master's, which most people takes 4 years, then you start doing chaplaincy. And so we do residencies just like nurses and doctors. So we call that work clinical pastoral education, or CPE for short. So you have to have 4 units of CPE, which turns out to be 1 year of training. Each unit lasts about 3 months, so quarterly. Once you finish that training, then you have to have 2,000 hours of work experience in some kind of chaplain setting, whether that's military, medical, business, whatever your setting is. Then you have to get endorsement from some kind of religious body that's recognized by the chaplaincy board, which again has a whole set of things. So for mine, in Disciples of Christ, which is the religious organization that I've connected with, right, I had to get ordained. I had to write a bunch of theological stance papers to make sure I align with their religious beliefs. I had to meet with them several times with some of their board members to like talk through those things. And then once all of that was approved, which took, in my case, a year and a half, then they gave me endorsement in order to do chaplaincy. So that was one piece of the board certification. Then there's just an infinite amount of writing that you have to do. We have 30 standards that we have to maintain, and so we have to write to all 30 standards. We have a code of ethics that we have to uphold. So one major thing about chaplains, we can't proselytize, right? So I'm not allowed to go into a room and try to convert somebody to my specific religious belief system. If that were to be found out, if I were doing that, I could lose my licensing and not be able to practice anymore. So they take it very seriously. Then you've got like a couple other like more like case study writing that you have to do. And so once you have all of those things, oh, and you have to also get like some letters from different people. So once you get all of that put together, then you submit it to the board. And then they tell you this is your date for basically like sitting like a thesis, right? So you've submitted all of this work, and then you have to basically like prove like yes, right? They like question you and drill you, and you have to prove you've learned the things that you need to learn. And then after all that, if they say yes, then you're a board certified chaplain. Yeah. So let's pause there for just a minute. I think there were some questions maybe that came up in that little bit.
That's so much training. That is so much. That's
Yep.
impressive. Yeah. Joanna, you had a question.
Yeah, when you say board certified, is that like through the state? Is it a national thing? What does that look like?
Yeah. So it's a national certification through the Association of Professional Chaplains, APC.
Is there anything state level? Do you have to have a license through the state of Idaho? Is there any? No?
Nope. It's the only certification is I mean there are other certifying bodies. APC is the primary one. Everywhere in the US will accept board certification from APC. There's another organization, which I always forget the name of. Also, I'm not going to lie, right? I'm a little biased because I love the group that I'm licensed with because I think they're the best. So the other group, there's not as many standards that they have to go through in order to achieve their certification. They basically like do some of their training and education and then sit a test. So yeah, most right, like in the military and then most medical settings and some schools and some businesses, require certification. But like hospice agencies, for example, don't. CMS, which is the Center for Medicare and Medicaid, doesn't have any stipulations for requirements for that part of the interdisciplinary team. So I think it just says something along the lines of you will provide some form of counseling. And so that typically is taken up by chaplains. But those chaplains are quite varied. More often than not, they are retired pastors. And there's a big difference between a chaplain and a pastor, right? A pastor's role and job is to convert people to their belief system, to offer spiritual and religious guidance from the mandates and doctrines of that tradition. Whereas chaplains, we're here to help people make meaning in whatever ways are important to them and have those ethical guidelines saying we cannot convert people. And there's a whole host of training outside of religion that comes with chaplaincy. Right. I've done a lot of studies in, sociology and, kind of depending on what path you take, like my personal path I've often worked in hospice settings. So I have a lot of end of life experience. So I have a lot of grief counseling in my background because that's a ton of what you do in hospice is grief support. But not everybody does that, right? Like my roommate, who's also a chaplain, his background is more with like rehab, and he works a lot with like neurology kind of things, just from his personal background. Right. Other chaplains have a lot more psych experience, and so work with folks with mental health concerns and behavioral health issues, and so might kind of go down that path a little bit more. So, yeah.
Marissa, what do you think, I love the whole idea of just pulling out, helping people to find meaning, and purpose for their life. I just love that. I think that's what people are seeking. And I think a lot of, end of life experiences, just recently I was with a person who's in her 90s, and she's like, I don't know why I'm still here. And I don't know what I've done for the last, she's been retired since she was 70. And so she's, it's like, how do you navigate those conversations of helping people to find meaning and purpose in their life when they are nearing the end? Like, how would you navigate that conversation, and what would that look like?
Yeah. So I'm a big believer in narrative therapy, and right, this idea that the stories that we tell, the ways in which we talk about ourselves to ourselves, but how we talk about ourselves to others, right? There's a lot of identity work that's being done in that, right? There's a lot of kind of life review and reflection that comes about from that. So for my personal, flavor or brand of chaplaincy, as I enter a space with folks, it starts out with a lot of that. Um, there's different kinds of spiritual assessment models that can be utilized, and so I use a lot of those assessment tools just to see kind of what spiritual issues somebody might be working through. And that's not just at end of life, right? That happens anytime we're in transition. So sometimes maybe it's things like, right, the need for forgiveness, right, to extend it, to receive it, right, to be reconciled in those relationships that are most meaningful to us. Right, sometimes we've got regrets in our lives where we wish we had done something differently, or we took a path and it led this way, and we wonder what our lives would have looked like if we had taken the other fork. So kind of playing in that space with folks sometimes. Right, I think it's very common when we're in the midst of suffering, whatever that looks like, to ask really big questions like, why me? Right? Why me and not somebody else? Haven't I been a good person? Why do I deserve this? Right? Or if you're more religious, where is God in the midst of my suffering, or the divine? So I work through a lot of that kind of stuff with folks. Um, in the midst of the unknown, whether that's because of a new health diagnosis or because we're at end of life, I think it's really common for human beings to want to fill that space with all of our anxiety and uncertainty and often worst case scenarios, right? So I also do a lot of work around, anxiety and stress management and overall well-being. Um, Obviously, that looks different in different contexts, right? It's going to be a different kind of exploration and conversation with someone who is recently diagnosed with, you know, stage 1 melanoma, and we have a strong certainty that it's probably going to be cured and you'll move on with your life, compared to someone who, has an end stage cancer diagnosis, mets all over the place, and we're at the end, right? Life has come to its normal and conclusion, right? Like all of us will experience one day. Um, right. Sometimes it's navigating, right, the need for control, right? Whether that's control of ourselves, um, control over the situations in which we find ourselves. Right. Sometimes it's our values that are being questioned, you know. Um, right. Who am I? If I have to have one of my limbs cut off, right? Am I still wholly me? Who am I if I have to receive blood products, but that doesn't align with my faith tradition? Do I forego those things to keep my faith, or do I pursue them and maybe lose touch with my community? So it kind of is as varied as the people in front of me for where something could go.
It's powerful, and just creating that space. What would be like, would you go back and see these folks again and again, or do you find that in your work, are you like, I would imagine, especially if someone is progressing rapidly in their disease process, you have maybe perhaps one opportunity to have those conversations, right? And so, you know, I feel like, oh my gosh, you could just talk for hours. Like I could talk to you for hours, and just like, finding more meaning and depth. And so I would imagine it's just trying to tease out what would be the most important. But on an average, how much time do you spend at the bedside?
Yeah, and that's super varied, like you said. Uh, right, there are moments where it's like I have introduced my role, right? Because I'm a big proponent of consent and wanting to make sure that if if people want me there, they know I'm available, and if they don't, they have the freedom and the power to say no. Because especially in hospital and hospice settings, right, you don't get to say no to a lot of things. Um, you lose a lot of privacy and agency, um, especially in the hospital setting. Uh, so right, for those visits where, right, I introduce my role and ask, this is what I do on your team. Do you have needs in this area, and do you want me to stay? They can say no, right? So those visits are very quick and easy, not even 5 minutes, right? But for those where, we're actually diving in, and it's actually one of the things that I really love about chaplaincy is, you gotta just kind of like siphon through the bullshit, right? Like there's not usually a lot of time to like do this extended rapport building. Like you kind of just got to like, all right, we're jumping into the deep end together. And I really love that. So yeah, for those visits, I mean, sometimes it's like, it's nothing to spend an hour with somebody. Sometimes I look up and it's like, oh my gosh, like I've been here for 3 hours. I gotta go. So it really, really varies.
Awesome. Karen, I see you have your hand up.
Thank you. Gosh, I'm learning all this stuff that I didn't know. It's just fascinating. Marissa, what is your caseload like at the hospital and how many chaplains are there? And do you, I'm thinking about when I've had my parents in the hospital, they're Catholic and they want someone Catholic to come.
Mhm.
So is that like through a volunteer? So is there chaplains and then there's volunteers that are of each faith tradition, or how is that all organized? Thank you.
Yeah, so right, this is every hospital system has its own system, right? So it's going to be varied. So I'm just talking about St. Al's when I mention this. But at St. Al's, right, it is a Catholic hospital. And so it does, how do I say this? Right, there are certain Catholic teachings and principles that it definitely upholds and honors. And on the one hand, I think that's great because it means more chaplains. So at the St. Al's in Boise, we have 5 staff chaplains, which is quite a lot. Yeah, most hospitals have like 1 or 2. We're like a 300 something bed hospital. So that's pretty good. So we each kind of have our own area of the hospital. Again, every chaplain has their own kind of spiritual, religious makeup personally. But as chaplains, we serve people of all faiths and no faith and everything in between. But because it is a Catholic institution, we do have a staff chaplain who is also a priest. So he's kind of dual, right? He is ordained as a Catholic priest and can perform all of the functions that only a priest can perform. So, right, uh, extending sacrament of Eucharist, sacrament of the sick and dying, which the old term is last rites, anointings, right? Those kinds of blessings that Catholics can only receive from a priest, a Catholic priest. So we happen to have that at ours. Not every hospital has all of those things, and not every Catholic hospital has a priest on staff that is also a chaplain, right? So St. Al's is part of Trinity Health. So there's a lot of different hospital systems across the country that fall under Trinity umbrella. So, right, like I've served at one of the Trinity hospitals in Florida, and they have priests that come and are like part-time on staff, but they're not chaplains, right? So the only role they perform is the priestly role. Yeah. So St. Al's and Boise, each of us has kind of our own area. So I cover inpatient oncology and palliative care. And then we've got 2 clinics on campus that are outpatient. And so there's an outpatient oncology and an outpatient palliative care that also houses our geriatrics clinic, which I also assist with. So like that's kind of the space that I cover. Right, one of our chaplains does kind of like the cardiology area, so right covers telemetry and the cardiac ICU and anything related to hearts. Right, he has like goes to the cardiac rehab. Right, one of our guys is like just the ICU, all the other ICUs and the neuro kind of stuff. One of our guys does like surgery and rehab because those seem to go together for us. So we kind of have those areas, but we have to provide 24/7 coverage to the hospital. So we kind of flex our schedules to help meet that need. So one weekday per week, we come in later in the afternoon and stay through the evening and then take a pager home, which, yes, we still have pagers like it's the 1990s. We take a pager home and we just get called back in for emergencies, right? So, like really bad traumas or deaths. Um, those are kind of the main ones, right? If there's something going on in the family maternity center, we always prioritize that. And then each of us takes one weekend. So basically, every 5 weeks, we're on call on the weekend and cover I think it ends up being like a 72-hour shift. And you're the only one in the hospital. So you cover the entire hospital yourself. So it's a lot of triaging. So we get consults, just like, specialty groups in the hospital get consults. But then we kind of do a lot of rounding in our areas, right? So sometimes it's like cold visits where I just go door to door for the new people and say, hi, like, this is who I am. This is my role on your team. Do you have any support needs I can assist with? Yes or no. And then I move on or I stay. Um, yeah. And then because I work with palliative care, that kind of gets me floating to other spaces in the hospital sometimes. Did I answer all your questions, Karen?
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's just, I mean, it's really fascinating. And I'm assuming that the hospital takes care of your salary because chaplaincy cannot be billed to Medicare or any health care. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. There's no, we don't make money. Chaplains don't make money from insurance. Yeah. So yeah, we're employed by the hospital as an additional service and support. Mhm.
But does hospice get money back for having a chaplain? No, that's also the same thing then. That's just a comfort thing through a hospice.
So with hospice, it's kind of different because you get a flat rate of pay per day per patient. But the four main disciplines that have to be offered per CMS guidelines are nurse, um, the medical director, a social worker, and then some kind of counseling support, right? Most hospice agencies will utilize chaplains, but that could also be, right, like a different kind of counselor, right? Like a grief counselor could fit in that role. So, mhm.
Well, such good stuff. I do have a question because as I listen to you, especially in the arena of a sudden passing, right? And so some deaths are, sudden and unexpected. And I know just in the end of life work that I've been doing, someone is doing really well and you have a level of attachment and you develop a relationship, and then you're expecting this loss to happen, for them to pass away eventually, but I don't feel like I'm ever ready, right? And so I would imagine that I would imagine in your role, that having this relationship and deep and meaningful conversations with folks, and I would imagine especially with the sudden passings or unexpected, or maybe it's a younger person, like how do you navigate your own self-care? Like what do you do to kind of manage the self-care and processing your own grief with the heaviness of the work that you do? How do you, what tips can you share with us, or what do you do to kind of help process that for yourself?
Yeah, yeah. So in general, right, I think part of human nature is you get kind of used to things. Um, So I've been in the death and dying world for, gosh, almost a decade now. And there's a little part of you that just gets used to death. Um, One thing I think helps is like when you're faced with those realities all the time, right? I- In normal life, in normal world, we tend to avoid these situations, right? We don't talk about death and dying and our preferences, right? We don't talk about what's important and meaningful to us, right? What gives our lives quality and value and all of that, right? We just kind of live and we do those things that make us feel alive, but don't actually talk about like what are those things and why do they do that for us. So one part of the work is because you're faced with it all the time, there's like this constant processing that happens, and sometimes that's very intentional, right? And luckily I'm with a team of people that I can sit with and explore, and they're safe and it's okay to ask questions and to wonder and to bring up other things. um, but more often it's just the internal work that's just part of it now. Right, so I'll go and attend a death and I'll see something that I haven't seen before, whether that's somebody's experience or a grief response somebody has, or right as I'm helping somebody navigate, maybe a new ritual to help them be okay, right? It makes me think about like when it's my time, right? What are those things that are important to me, right? So I've done a lot of that work internally just from being exposed to that all of the time. Um, but yeah, there are people who like, right, they just kind of get under your skin for whatever reason you really connected. Um, and so, in those times, sometimes it's I need to take a step back, right? Luckily, again, I work with people who get it, who do this all the time. And so I can say, hey, I had a really hard loss and it was tough. And I let myself emote what I need to emote, right? And especially in healthcare, I think sometimes there's this idea that you have to like shut it down, right? Be the professional. But like we're human too, right? And so there are times, and I think there's a way in which to have an emotional response that's authentic, but also isn't like distracting from that person's experience, right? I always talk about like my emotional response as the professional in the room shouldn't be bigger than the family member's emotional response. That's maybe a sign like, ooh, my boundaries were maybe not so great. Which is another part of it, right? Is like having to maintain some of those boundaries and recognize like, yes, I have love and care and affection for every person in front of me because we are part of the human family, right? But this person in front of me isn't my person. And that's a huge distinction to make. And there's like a releasing that happens because of that, right? There's not like that attachment that comes with the deepened relationship of me personally to them. Um, Yeah, so that's a lot of the things. Um, right. I'm personally not super grounded in my own body. So I've been trying to do more physical things because um, I tend to store a lot of that in my body and it doesn't go places, right? It just like sits in there. So that's kind of like part of why I took up softball this year, right? And I've been on this like new physical health journey of like exercising, right? Because for me, that's a really great release because I'm not good in my personal body, but other people have other practices. So,
Reiki?
right? Yes, yeah. I
Massage?
yes, yeah, yeah. Which, funny enough, my very first experience with Reiki was through a massage session several
Very
years
cool.
ago.
Very cool.
And I actually just finished the Reiki training with Christine last weekend. So
Yay.
I'm now a Reiki practitioner.
Yay, good.
Yes.
Good. I was
So
gonna say I think I know a gal.
yeah, yeah.
Can I contribute a little bit to what you were
Please.
saying? Um, I that resonates with me how like sometimes I don't have the language for my experience. I just know the feeling. But in my early work with oncology massage, and I did in-home caregiving too, normalizing the conversation of death was really helpful in my not emoting about it. Um, my very first client that spoke very openly and candid about it, she had emphysema and I was caregiving for her. And it made me so uncomfortable to hear her speak about her dying. But it was so easy and natural, and she took ownership of it. And then we just talked about her life, and she allowed me to ask questions, which was uncomfortable, but just that open dialogue really was helpful. Um, and it was that experience that really made my oncology work just kind of morph. I found that being that neutral place, like you were talking about, not having it so close to me, was actually really comforting to my clients. And that I was okay speaking about it and not being emotional because like their family members were being emotional about it and they felt comfortable talking and speaking about it and it being a safe place without it just being, really emotionally it just energized. So that thank you for saying that because that sometimes I don't have the language for it, but that resonated with me. I just normalizing the discussion about just normalizing it because we are all dying. We
Yes.
all are, and people are afraid to talk about it, and it's part of our life, just like I mean, I don't want to be cavalier to say just as like making dinner or something, but like it is part of our life. Every day we're on that journey home and people don't want to talk about it, but yeah, I tend to have a harder time with death that's closer to me. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's normal, right? Because it hits home,
Mm-hmm.
right? And like most
Mm-hmm.
humans, at least for those of us who know that like yes, death
Mm-hmm.
is coming for all of us, right?
Yeah.
If we've been given a birth
Yeah.
certificate, we'll be given a death
That's
certificate.
certificate. Yeah.
Uh, right, but being faced with it
Mm-hmm.
ourselves, right? That's a new layer to the conversation.
Mm-hmm. You also said looking back at yourself, right? Thinking your own mortality and things like that. That was really helpful for me in in the questions and thinking about myself and my death and you know um, just putting it back on myself and how I felt about it
Mm-hmm.
for myself.
Yeah. I think I see Maria's hand up, but
Yeah,
yeah.
this might sound like kind of a weird question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think people, or have you encountered people that have a very firm spiritual foundation, I guess you could say, that accept death more readily? Like, have you experienced that, or is that just
Oh yeah.
kind of, yeah, okay. You have
Yeah.
experienced that, okay.
And that's across various religious systems, right? I think, right, like all things, there's nuance, right?
Yeah.
We really like to make things black and white, but let me tell you, it's mostly gray. There's just
Okay.
a lot of gray. So yeah, I mean, I've seen, Christians who are on both sides of like, yeah, I know where I'm going. I believe in afterlife. This is a totally normal thing, and I'm very accepting and ready to go when I'm called. And I've seen Christians who are in the same tradition be like, absolutely not. Like, death is the most terrifying thing ever, and we're going to fight it. And, right, we're hoping for a miracle in the sense of healing physically in this life, right? And that's every religious tradition and no religious tradition.
Okay. 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 It's not black and white then. Okay. I guess I want
Yeah.
somebody that do want black and white, but oh well. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Okay.
Do you think, Marissa, that that's a great question, Maria, because it made me think of like I'm always thinking about, well, I hate to say I'm not always thinking about death, but it is there, right?
Mhm.
And when I work with people at end of life, it really allows me to step into the space of, okay, so I'm learning so much. Like every person that I come in contact with are my teachers. Like they're showing
Mhm.
me
Mhm.
how to die. And I saw most recently the most beautiful end of life experience because she I can just I get her. She was just a wee bit controlling, but she planned it all out, right? She just to the T, like pictures on the wall, flowers here, this goes
Mhm.
here. And then it was just so amazing to just watch her step into that space of like she just went into this beautiful peaceful state of acceptance and just and it was just beautiful and I learned so much from her and I've also seen people who have not had any planning whatsoever and they're just kind of hanging on and so I wanted to ask that
Mm.
question. What is your experience of like even they're always talking about advanced care, the advanced care planning and stuff like that, but it goes so much more further than that, of just all the
Mhm.
I love yous, goodbyes, pre-planning, all of that. Like, what's your experience of someone who's had those conversations, pre-planning versus not? Like,
Yeah.
again, I'm like Maria, black and white. Is it
Good
real obvious,
question. Yeah.
or what? Like, what's the trend mostly?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't, right. Again, there's not like, oh, yeah, everybody who has an advance directive and pre-planned what they want, like they're at peace and they're totally good to go. Right.
They're
And
like,
those who
peace
don't,
out.
they don't. Right. Like that's not the case. Like there are some folks who have advance directives and right, they linger and it's a more complicated death, right? There's more things going on, right? And there's folks who don't have those advanced care planning documents and they go peacefully like it's totally great. Right? I don't know. Um I think there can be benefit in that time period, whatever it is, between when somebody's here and cognizant, whatever that means based on their specific illness, and the time of death, right? There's kind of this space that grows for many people where they're not necessarily with it anymore completely, right? This is where we see a lot of maybe more sleeping, or maybe people are having hallucinations, or right, these very mystical experiences of seeing things that the rest of us can't see, or they're saying things that don't make sense. And it's like you can tell like they're not 100% here in this body in this life. They're not there, whatever there is, whatever next is. They're in this like liminal in between phase, right? And I think some of that is like that spiritual inner work, right? And some people have been doing that, right? And I really think that's where that peace comes from, is they've whatever that is for them, right? They've started doing it, or they have done it, and they're at a place where it's like, okay, take me on, right? And for others, I think they linger and it takes longer because they still have that some of that work to do.
Will you work with people's families when they're in that?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I work with families a lot. You know, we have folks who, pass away in the hospital. But also because I work in hospice, right, where people are taking their loved one home or they're in a facility setting. Um, So yeah, I work with families a ton, right? And sometimes the work that I do isn't even with the patient, right? It's like solely working on the family and what they need to be at peace and to let go and to give permission, right? Which is a huge thing of that sometimes I think people need to hear. So yeah, it's a lot of like there's practical support in there, right? Like helping people navigate funeral arrangements or um, right, talking through what to expect in the grief process, which is already starting, but continues on after death has occurred. Right, and with hospice, like there's a whole bereavement program that happens for families after somebody dies. So, yeah.
We have about 15 minutes, and I, of course, could talk forever, but do want to be able to give folks an opportunity to ask questions or, oh, Tina's got her hand up. Go ahead, Tina.
My last patient, he had a glioblastoma, and his wife had passed with cancer, about a year and a half before I came on as his caregiver. And he had other health problems. But all he could ask is, when am I going to die? I want to go join Becky. When am I going to die?
Mm-hmm.
And all of us, the doctors, the nurses, the hospice, all of us kept telling, we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
There's no answer to that. And he couldn't accept that. He had a really hard time accepting that. But he did finally pass.
Yeah. None of us have a crystal ball, right?
Mm-hmm.
When doctors prognosticate, right? And prognosis is kind of that giving of a timeline, right? It's based off of their best guess, based on the symptoms that somebody is experiencing in the moment when that evaluation occurs. And basically, like, right, to offer a prognosis, it's kind of based on like all these studies that showed like based on different illnesses, right? What are the standard trajectories that people take as they near the end of their life? And so across illnesses, right, there are certain characteristics that doctors look at, right? So it could be things like weight loss, right? Changes in eating, changes in sleeping, changes in output. Um, right? It can be skin changes. It can be, right, changes in your ability to regulate your body temperature, changes in the amount of infections you're getting, changes in your stability, right? So like increased weakness and falls and stuff like that. And then, right, as you have more acute events, right? So somebody who, right, has cancer, but then gets like pneumonia, right? That's a new acute event. Right? That's going to change the timeline, right? And sometimes people heal from that, and then that changes the timeline. So, yeah, we're just making our best human estimate along the way. And I've definitely seen people who live longer than that estimate just to spite the doctor. Right? Because that's who they are, right? They've been that person that's like, oh, you're going to tell me? You're not going to tell me.
I think sometimes just like as a hospice nurse, someone has a diagnosis, and when someone qualifies for hospice, they are it is determined that their life expectancy is less than 6 months. And so they are admitted into hospice. And then they go through this stabilization period, right?
Mhm.
So things are kind of stable for them.
Mhm.
And to me, that's just like the juicy, like that's an opportunity for so much healing to happen, right? And I think that um, you know, I remember this I don't even remember, she was close to 100 and she just kept saying, when is this going to happen? And her family's like, this is going on forever. And I had said to them, this could be your last Saturday together. Like this could be it, and so really what it reminded me of is just really living each day like it is our last, right? So I really feel like just being mindful that this could be I mean, for all of us, this could be our last day together, right? And so just being mindful of the time that we have. And to me, the dying process is very similar to the birthing process, right? So there is no the baby, there's no due date for the baby, right? The baby's going to come when the baby's going to come. And so I think just being in that pause, it really seems to lengthen the amount of time that we have. And I don't know, just being mindful about being able to be present for those moments, even though it is hard in that waiting period. So, yeah. We have, gosh, about 5 more minutes. Is there anyone else that would like to ask any questions or just have any thoughts?
Someone's at my door. I'll get it in a minute.
Oh,
Grant, how are you doing after being on here for the first time?
I've been
I'm just gonna check it really quick.
I've been exploring my spirituality over the last year and a half, and just I wanted to kind of get other views, other inputs, just to see, well, how does it mesh, or how does it make sense? Is it going to become part of my truth? Yeah, I was had come to terms with accepting Linda's death in March, and losing Kendra was just felt really unjust, like just how quickly it happened. And so I think, though, I will end up in the same place accepting her death that I did with Linda's. At least I hope that I've learned enough about grief and loss that I'll be consistent with what I think is true.
Grief is one of the hardest things that I have lived through. I lost my mom on October 15th of 2020 and lost my husband December 14th of 2020.
Wow. Yeah.
And I'm still going through it, and you will. I mean, it's just going to get to the point where, yeah, it won't hurt quite as much, but you'll have those moments where you just want to crawl into bed and curl up and just bawl your eyes out.
Yeah, for sure.
And the best thing to do is like coming here and discussing it and letting your feelings out and crying into bed and crying your eyes out. Well, I'm glad you came.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad too. It's been.
yeah. Oh, go ahead, Maria. Yes,
Yeah,
thank you.
I had one more thing to say on that. For me, believe it or not, there was a Bible in hospice, and I was so glad it was there because I think my husband was okay. I think I was worse than he was when I was in hospice, right? And I found just being able to read the Psalms just comforted me, right? And I think even after my husband went, I found that I could go to God and tell him, like I felt like my soul had been wounded, because I think it's our soul that God deals with, right? And I just felt that he understood my angst, right? And I don't know, for me, I felt I could go to him. So I guess I need to do that more for myself now, but I do feel that that was a comfort to me that I think if I hadn't had, I don't know what I would have done. It's hard to explain that. I just don't know. I don't know if I would have survived really, because that was a comfort, right? So I don't know. I'm just saying that. I do think the spirituality is very important. Um, and lately, I guess I've been living so much that I'm neglecting it somewhat, and I'm probably going to get back to it a bit more, because I realize that's where the real comfort does come from. Anyway, for me, I don't know. And my husband was totally at peace. I mean, the poems he wrote, I thought he was working it out with God and the angels. He was fine. Like I realized that after he went, and he was at peace. He wasn't uptight. He wasn't like, he wasn't, oh, I'm suffering, I'm dying. He was like, I don't know. So that comforted me. So I think maybe that's a blessing I've had, right? Um, the process of dying is hard, but the spiritual part, I think, is the hope. I don't know. Okay, enough talk here. Yeah.
I love that, Maria, so much. You know, I think every time I hear the song Amazing Grace, I cry, like every single time. And that just brings up so much from my childhood. And, yeah, I mean, I think that is just deeply embedded in us, and um, yeah, that's beautiful. It does, I think we have those. I think that's very comforting to know that that's available. Yeah. And Grant, thank you so much for joining us. What a treat to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's so new, and you've been through a lot in a very short time. Give yourself some time. I couldn't have talked like this 6 months. Like a person is exhausted emotionally, mentally, spiritually when someone passes like that, right? And you've had two. So that's hard. I feel for you. I really do. It's a tough deal.
Yeah. I may just be, in a numb state right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm losing too. So it felt that way for a few months after Linda had passed too. I was able to talk freely about it, and then things sort of, okay, it hit.
Well,
Yeah,
and
that's tough.
if I can share, Grant, because I know you personally and have been on that journey with you, you did a lot of grief work. You did a lot.
Yeah.
And most people, I would say, don't take the time to invest in the processing and the work that you did, especially after Linda. So
Yeah. Yeah, I see that too. Thank you.
I love something that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and David Kessler talk about, and that is that grief grief doesn't go away. We just get bigger. So we learn from our grief and we become bigger people, but our losses are always going to be our losses. And how grateful I am that I had those losses, that I love something so much that I feel the loss, and would never want to forget those people that I've lost that I love very much, but know that I'm a bigger person because of that loss. I have grown in so many ways. I'm not saying that it, like you were just saying, when you were saying, Marissa, which fork in the road, right? How could it have been different? Couldn't have been. This is the way it was. But that I can look back now in the experiences and have gratitude, not glad they died by any means, but glad that they lived so that I had the experience after they died to become a bigger person. And that's I guess the paradox in all of it. but I do love the fact that grief never goes away. It's just that I get bigger, not eating more, but that my although I wouldn't mind if that would be okay. I get bigger and eat more, but no. Yeah. So thanks for letting me share that.
Thank you so much, Karen and Maria and Grant and Tina and Fran. And thank you, especially Marissa, for joining us tonight with this Death Over Tea. I really enjoy spending time in this space. It really fills my cup. And just to let you know, Grant, we meet monthly on the 27th of every month at 7 p.m. So if you're interested, we also have the End of Life Doulas of Idaho, a group, a collaborative group here in the Treasure Valley. We meet in person at Allsip in Person's funeral home. It is is it the second Wednesday of every month in person at 7 p.m. And this next time we're talking about legacy work. So there's usually an educational topic that's provided and support. So it's not a grief support group, but it is just people coming in the community of just being curious and just talking about these things that come up in our lives. And it's really created a beautiful environment. So you're welcome to come. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And where's that at?
It's in Nampa at the Allsip in Person's funeral home, funeral chapel in Nampa. Allsip in Person's. Yeah. And so I have my little business is called True North Awakening, and have different events and stuff like that. You're welcome to look. And Marissa, how is it that people can get a hold of you? If people want to reach out to you, what would be the best way for them to find you?
Yeah, you can call me or email me. I did put the information in the chat, but I'll say it out loud as well. My email address is just my name with a period in between my first name and my last name. So Marissa _Click at St. Alphonsus, and Saint is spelled out, .org. My phone number is 208-367-3194. And I do share that phone number with another chaplain. So if you hear a male voice, it's okay. You still called the right place.
Very good. Well, I just want to thank you again, Marissa, for taking the time to meet with us, and to thank everybody for joining us this evening. I can't thank you guys enough. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording, and